Good day, everyone. My name is Azzah Budianto from Department of Anthropology, Universitas Airlangga. Today, I will present a journal article titled "Violence and Masculinity in Small-Scale Societies," written by Deborah L. Martin for Bahasa Inggris lecture. In my presentation today, I will talk about how violence and masculinity are intertwined with the cultural aspects of society through an in-depth anthropological analysis. Before we continue to the premise of the article, let's talk about the article itself first. Violence and Masculinity in Small-Scale Societies is a part of Supplement 23 in the Winogrand Symposium, published on Current Anthropology, Toward an Anthropological Understanding of Masculinities, Maleness, and Violence, Volume 62 in February 2021. Next, this is the article abstract. The abstract talks about the whole premise of the article. Simply put, Violence and Masculinity in Small-Scale Societies talks about male violence and how broad it is, using anthropological lens to try to explain how it intertwines with society and the structure within. I will divide my current topic into 4 parts. First is the history of male violence, second is about ritualized violence and masculinity, and third is about the examples of ritualized violence, and fourth is the conclusion. Indeed, nobody can come out from a violent incident unscathed. It is called violent for a reason. Hence, we know that violence brings harm, but in this article, Martin proposes the idea that violence possesses an underlying cultural logic, hence the difference in its definitions throughout different cultures and times. Specifically, violence is a significant aspect in native or indigenous people's culture. By natives, I mean people who are practicing distinct cultures that are usually unique, cultures that are theirs only. Some of the indigenous people died with their cultures alongside, some still live even to this day, though they are not practicing all of the cultures they were inherited. Male violence is a huge part of each indigenous cultures. According to Martin, male violence are learned, expressive, and cultural behaviors. The victims of the violence are important of birthing and rebirthing male identities, which in this case is masculinity. Masculinity is defined as a construct of how a male is supposed to behave in a social setting in their culture. Later on, this article will discuss several examples on shaping male identities. A number of them are public rituals for boys who are transitioning into adulthood to show their so-called courage and skills in pseudo-combat. Before we move on to the examples, it is worth mentioning that according to Roper in 1969 and Bayer et al. In 2018, same-species violence is not a new thing. It is dated as far back as 400,000 years ago in mid-Pleistocene, so we can safely conclude that warfare, slavery, conquering areas to take their resources, and everything related to male violence are not new. Though it was found even in pre-literary history, basically a long time ago, it is important to note that masculinity, aggression, and violence are not hereditary. Neither of those are fixed or static, but those are the results of relational, dynamic, and complex behaviors that have power and meaning that depends on the context. The question we'd like to draw an answer of is, how is violence incorporated into rituals, codes of conduct, practices, and performance that shape male identities? So, in the early history, males collaborate with each other for warfare, hunting, and raiding parties. They worked in a large group to ensure each other's safety, and this tradition sets up a pattern we often see in small-scale societies, such as polygyny, in which one man has multiple wives, and then abduction of women, captivity of women and children, wife-stealing, and even group massacres. In these sorts of small-scale societies, there needs to be socialization, learning, and cultural sanctions to normalize the violence males participate in. The cultural sanctions and socialization are in forms of harsh rites of passage for boys into their process into adulthood. The use of rituals are to self-perpetuate violence so that violence can be passed on from generation to generation. These rituals are basically behaviors that are loaded with meanings and symbols in a culture. According to Whitehead, the effect of rituals are reducing anxiety, boosting confidence, and communicating culturally specific meaning about violence in that context. Next, these are a few examples of ritualized violence. The first one is Suri stick fighting in Ethiopia, and it was a productive response to the problem of local and regional conflicts, vengeance seeking, and risk taking behaviors in young male. It was highly ritualized, culturally sanctioned, and managed by the elders. The second one is Yucca ritualized duels and raiding, and in Venezuela. They performed a ritualized warfare in neighboring groups over many generations. In their cultural logic, without warfare and raids, the world would be in chaos and disorder. With raids and ambushes came social orders, hence why they did it. The third is Apache monster slayer in the southern Great Plains of the America continent. In Apache warriors' cosmology, they were surrounded by a hostile world full of strangers, which were the people who are not related to them by blood or marriage, so war was their only option. Fourth one is in Mississippian cultures and Birdman in United States, where they have a cultural icon called Birdman. He was the embodiment of hypermasculinity every warrior strived to be. The people believed that to appease the deities, they should enact warfares. The Birdman symbols and iconographies all depicted the centrality of males, the importance of hand-to-hand combat, the fear of being injured and captured in combat, and males' relations to birds of prey such as the falcon. Mache people of Peru were considered extremely violent. They tortured their enemies and dismembered the bodies. Sometimes the body were eaten, and researchers have found that this were merely a ritualized form of combat to affirm their masculinity. They did all those not to gain lands, resources, females, or even to build their empire stronger. All five examples have these things in common. First one is ritualized violence is a form of showing, nurturing, and affirming male masculinity. Second, most of them believed that warfare is the only way to please their deities and to restore the balance of the world. Third, they all idolize hypermasculinity. And fourth, men who participate in showing violence were honored more. In conclusion, it is revealed that the underlying proximate causes of male violence seen in the archaeological and ethnographic records for patriarchal small scale in early societies was that highly ritualized forms of culturally sanctioned violence are related to the formation of particular male identities or masculinities. This theory is supported by multiple evidence. Focusing on the historical aspect, male violence wasn't considered a bad thing because it usually was allowed, followed by a period of restorative and regenerative effects on society such as societal orders. But by this I do not mean to say that I condone violence. Violence is an act that is not and will not be acceptable as it brings harm to others. Okay, everybody, that will be all for today's presentation. If any of you have questions, please do ask. Thank you for your wonderful questions, and I hope I'd answered all of them satisfactorily. And due to our limited time, you can contact me in my email if you still have further questions. Thank you for listening, and have a good day, everyone.